Let's now have a look at the confirmation dialog. We are going to start with a div, with the class dialog, and this time we are going to associate confirm class with it. We are gonna go for class as well, visible class, and the type this time is going to be confirm. Then we are going to have inside of this div paragraph with vhtml for our message. So our message is going to be displayed in the paragraph inside of this div. And then we are going to have a small navigation with yes and no buttons. Both of these buttons will be represented by span tags with class small button. Then we are going to use the if directive to only show this button, this first one, when we are not processing the request. So exclamation mark and processing property, which we are going to add to our data properties. So let's quickly add it after the timeout. Processing by default false. And we will also apply click event to this button, and when we click we will want to call the method which you don't have yet and which will be called make call. Let's just quickly add method stub for this one. So after all these methods, let's create the make call. Let's scroll up, and for this button we will have yes. Let's now duplicate this button, remove the exclamation mark because this button I want to be shown when the call is being processed. Let's add disabled to the class, and let's remove the event binding here, and we are going to replace this label with the icon. So it's going to be I class FAS, FA spinner, and FA spin, so it's rotating, and then FW to give us a bit more space. And then another button, which is going to be button with label no. So span class small, this time success button. So it's going to give us a green button. And this button will have a click event, which will call clear method. And a no for the label. So here we've got three buttons. These two will only show one at a time. So before we click yes button, this first one will be shown once we've clicked it. Then we will set this processing to true, at which point this one is going to be hidden and it will reveal this one with the spinning icon. And no, when we click on this button, will clear the dialog. Okay, so let's now go to our data properties. We need to add a few new properties here. After the message, we are going to add URL, lowercase, which by default will be null. Then we are going to add data property, which will be an empty object, and method type, which by default will be get. This is when we're going to be making an AJAX request. And I think that's everything for the time being. Okay, now let's go down to our confirm event method. Now here we've got our data as the argument. First of all, what we want to do is to clear any existing dialogues. If there's any dialog and we've clicked the button or any other trigger to show the confirmation dialog, first of all, we want to clear the existing dialog if there's any. So this clear. That's the first thing we need to do. After this, we are going to associate this ID equals data ID. Then we're going to have this type equals confirm. Then we're going to have this message equals data message. Next, we are going to check if data has URL property. And if it does, then we're going to associate it with our internal data property URL. So this URL, data URL. Then we are going to check also if data has data property, and if it does, again the same situation, this data equals data data. And after this, the last one is going to be if data method, then this method type equals data method, but we are going to convert it to lowercase, so to lowercase, to ensure that our request methods are lowercase. So if we have get, post, put, patch, everything else is going to be in lowercase. Okay, so that's our confirm event finished. Let's now update our clear method. After the message, we also need to clear now this URL, converting this to just null, then this data, setting it to an empty object, this method type, which will become get again, and then this processing equals false. Okay, now if we scroll down to our new method, make call, what's going to happen here is, first of all, we are going to set this processing property to true. So when we click this yes button and we call this make call method, then processing will get set to true, and this spinning icon will replace this yes button to indicate that we are processing the request. Now we are going to check if this URL, if we have URL within the request, then that means that we are supposed to make an AJAX request, but this is something for later on. Else, what we are going to do is we are going to call this success method. And let's quickly create this one. I'm going to scroll up a little bit. Success, and this success method will take the response as an argument, because it will also be used with our AJAX request. And here we are just going to go for event bus, and we are going to fire the event with this ID, concatenated with hyphen and called. So whoever's listening for this event will receive the following data, response, which will be what we actually going to pass through as an argument, so response, and then dialog, which will be the instance of this TopDialog component, so this. Okay, so what's going to happen now? I'm going to show you actually how we can use this confirmation dialog to submit our form. But before we submit, we're going to see this confirmation message. Are you sure you want to submit the form? Yes, and if we click yes, then the form is going to be submitted and validation will kick in. Otherwise, if we click no, then form will not be submitted and no validation will be triggered. Okay, so this is just an exercise. I'm going to open this app.js file. I'm going to duplicate this first line, comment it for the time being, because we're going to get back to it later on. And I'm going to add mounted method here. And then we are also going to have methods where I'm going to specify the trigger method. And this trigger method, if we just open our views and then main index .blade, I'm just going to add quickly a button here. Type button with the class button, and let's just add click event to it, which will call this trigger method. And let's just say trigger. If we go back, so from within this trigger method, what I'm going to do is call event bus, and we are going to fire the event called top confirm. So it's going to trigger this confirmation dialog. And what we are going to send through as arguments is going to be an object with the ID test button and message, which will say testing event handling. And I think that's fine. Okay, from within the mounted now, when we will trigger this event, let's just go to our TopDialog. I'm going to close the file browser and let's split the view here. So when I'm going to call this method, top confirm, this will trigger this confirm event method. And the confirm event method will do all those things that we've just done. So first of all, it will clear any existing dialog that might be still visible. Then it will associate the values from within the data object with the properties. And once all these are populated, obviously because the message will be visible, that will show the dialog with yes and no buttons. And then what's going to happen when we click on the yes button, we will call this make call method. The processing will be set to true, and then we are going to call this success because we will not be sending URL. That's why we'll go straight away to the success method, which in return will fire the event called whatever ID we've passed through, which is this test button with hyphen called. So now we need to listen to this event. Event bus, and let's listen to the event called test button with hyphen called. And once this event is triggered, then we're going to get the response. And let's use the function here again. And what we're going to do is do response dialog, and then we go for clear method. And for this clear method, we are going to pass the argument to it with success key set to true. Now, dialog is representing the instance of this whole component, so that we can actually call this clear method on it. So if we scroll up, that will in return at the end call another event. So this will dispatch the event again with the same ID, test button -cleared. So now another event, I'm just going to duplicate this one and rename it. So test button cleared. And here what I'm going to do is first check if isn't response success. So if it doesn't contain this index success and it isn't set to true, then we just return. We don't want to do anything else from within this listener. Otherwise, what we're going to do is event bus, and I want to fire the event submit update form. Now, what's going to happen now if we open our form and then wrapper, and I'm going to open this in the other window. So now we need to actually register the listener for this event. So duplicate this first one, this event listener from within the created method. And here we're looking for submit, and then we're going to be looking for the group. And if we go back to our edit form, you see update form is the group of for this specific form. So we have submit update form. Now this listener will listen for this submit update form. And when this event occurs, what we want to do is submit the form. So let's just call the submit a method when that event is being triggered. Okay, let's now compile everything. So npm run dev. All that's now compiled. Let's go to the browser, refresh the page. We have this button. If we click on that button, that shows the confirmation dialog. If I click on no, nothing happens. If I click again and click yes, that submits the form. You can see the form has been submitted, the validation has kicked in, and the TopDialog has also shown up. Now, another thing, if I click submit, the same thing will happen. So what I would like to do in this situation is when I'm using the external trigger, I would like to disable the button for the form. I would like to disable the submission of the form. And here's how we can do it. If we go back to the editor, what we can do now, if we go back to our wrapper, let's add another property to our wrapper component. After the behavior, let's add the property called event submit only. And this one will be of the type Boolean, and default will be false. By default, we want to be able to submit form with the submit button or with the return when we actually hit enter on our keyboard within the field. So if we scroll down to the submit method, first thing we're going to do here is check if this event submit only, then we just return. Otherwise, we are going to call another method, and I'm going to create this method here. So submit event. And what I'm going to do is move this validate then and catch to the submit event. So from within the submit, now we're going to call this event submit event. So if it's event only submission, then that means that when we click on a button, the standard button, or if we hit return when our cursor is within the field, then that will not work. Then we just return and we won't be submitting the form. But if this flag is set to false, which is by default, then we still will be executing this submit event. Now, if we scroll up from this event listener here for the submit, we are going to change this to, rather than submit, we're going to change it to submit event. So it needs to call this submit event method. Okay, now if we save it again, let's recompile everything. And once that's done, let's go back to the editor actually, because one thing we need to do is go back to our form and add this new property to our form wrapper. So it's going to be a Boolean, so colon at the beginning, event submit only equals true. If we now save it and preview it in the browser, refresh, if I now click on submit button, nothing happens. If I enter anything or just hit return within the field, nothing happens either. But when I click on this trigger button and click yes, there we go, button, the form has been submitted. We have the validation message as well. Okay, so now if we go back to the editor, let's remove this event submit only, because that's not quite what we wanted. This was just an exercise for now to show you how this can actually work. Let's go back to our app.js. Let's remove all of this and let's uncomment what we had originally here. But as you know, now you have an extra option which you can use with your form. If you ever need to submit form with a confirmation message, then it's there.